If you're given a fraction that's like 7 over 0, would it be considered a whole number because it reduces down to 0, or would you consider it a...
No, we'll talk. I'm going to add, so this is all you need to know for this section or chapter or this semester. And there's several other categories of numbers. And one is imaginary numbers, and they fall outside the realm of real. You don't need to know this. I'm just talking about it. Okay, imaginary numbers are ones that would be something like the square root of a negative number. And so it's still a number, but it's not a real number. All of this, so these whole things, so all the imaginary numbers along with the real numbers fall into a category of what's called complex numbers. Complex numbers have a real portion and an imaginary portion, even though one might be missing. If it has one or both of those parts, it's considered a complex number. And what you asked falls outside of even these. Division by 0 is what's called undefined. It doesn't even fit within that complex number system, and so that even falls outside of those. So even though it's written as a fraction, it doesn't have a defined value, so you can't locate it on the number line. All right, questions regarding this classification system? What I'd like you to do is, in the sample problem 1 on page 2 of the precal portion, I want you to see if you can classify each of those numbers from that given set. I'll write the set here. Probably notice a form of a number that you might not be familiar with. Right here, this cube root. And when you see a number that's written like this one is, and if there was no 3 here, you know that's a square root. You have a button on your calculator for that. But on these calculators, this cube root button doesn't exist in an easy to access location. It's buried in the catalog. If you want to look for it, you can find it. But there's an easier way just to manipulate it. And the way that you would do that is the negative would fall outside. You take the base, whatever is inside your radical, and you're going to take that base to the power of, and we're going to change this root into a fraction. And we're going to talk about this later in the year, or later in the semester. And the fraction is always 1 over whatever this is called an index. Whatever this index is going to go in the denominator of our fraction. And so if you take this whole quantity, negative quantity 27 to the power of 1 over 3, okay, that's equivalent to saying the cube root. If this index had been a 5, then you would take negative quantity 27 over 1 over 5. You just rewrite the index in that form. And so if you wanted to use your calculator to evaluate this to see what it is or what the answer is, what do you get when you calculate this expression? Sir? Negative 3. So the value of this is negative 3. So if we were to use that example, so even though the form is written in this, its value is negative 3, so which of these classifications does that fit? Is it a natural number? No. Is it a whole number? No. Is it an integer? Yes. Is it a rational number? Irrational? No. Real number? Yes. So it's going to fit into all 3 of those categories. Okay, let's go through each of these individually. Negative 8. What's the most specific classification negative 8 will fall into?
Integer.
Same ones, right? Integer. Therefore, it's also a rational form. The Q represents quotient. Okay, and then the real number R. And what about negative square root of 8? If you type that into your calculator, does it come out to be an integer value?
Yeah.
No. So it's going to be a irrational, and since it falls into one of these categories, it'll also be considered real. And what about 27?
Natural.
So it's a natural, therefore it's also whole, an integer, a rational, and real. Hey, what about 0.8? Rational is the most specific, therefore it's also a real number. And what about square root of negative 8?
None.
This is an imaginary number, right? What happens when you try to type that into your calculator?
Error.
It says non-real number, right? Or does it? Okay, or it says error. It may specifically tell you. And now, if your calculator is set to complex mode, which it can be, you might get an answer in terms of I, which represents imaginary numbers. If that's the case, show me, and I'll change your calculator back. You don't really need to be in complex format yet. Okay, 0 over 27, which is the most specific category for it?
None.
It would be a whole number.
Whole number, right? So you can take 0 divided by 27. So if there's 27 of you guys in here, if I gave you $0 to split, how much would each of you walk home with?
0.
There you go. So it's a whole number, an integer, a rational form, and a real. Okay, what about the symbol pi?
Irrational.
Irrational, therefore it's also real. And then negative 8 divided by 0, we just talked about that. Remember, division by 0. And if you try this on your calculator will actually tell you undefined. Okay, so this does not even exist. Therefore, it would be classified as none. All right. Are there any questions regarding just the classification of these?